Good morning, everybody. I can see that people are still joining us. You're very welcome. We'll just give it a few more minutes, or another minute or so as people join us in the room. But we really appreciate you joining us this morning. It's an exciting moment for the EOA and for our wider network. So we'll just see. There we go. There's a few more people joining us. Hopefully no one's encountered any problems in registration. We're all good. Right, well, I think we should get started. We've got a lot of exciting content to get through. So good morning, my name's James Levine. I'm Chief Exec of the Employee Ownership Association, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about some incredible findings from some new research that many of you will have contributed to. Just going to talk you through today's agenda to make sure you've got a sense of what we're going to be spending some time doing today. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just introducing the work shortly, and then I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Campbell McDonald, Chief Executive at Ownership at Work, who are our research partner in this programme. Campbell and I are going to field some questions following that, so please do post, or as we were sort of sharing information this morning, do think of any questions you'd like to pose to us regarding the findings or how we've gone about the work itself, and pop that in the Q&A. You can upvote your favourite questions, and so I'll be chairing a Q&A session after we've shared the findings, and then after the conclusion of that, we're going to break out into various tables for various discussions, and I'll introduce those later on so you can see which tables you'd like to join. But I'm going to be joined here with some of my EOA colleagues and Campbell and I, just to talk about what else is going on in the wider sector. Brilliant. So hopefully you're all in the right space. I would like to start this morning by saying a huge thank you. A huge thank you to all of those that made this piece of work possible, starting with our principal sponsors. So that's the John Lewis Partnership, Mott MacDonald, Scott Barder and Howden, but also our supporting partners, RM2, Gripple, Glide, Fieldfisher, Make and Loadhog. Supporting them has been a panel of academic experts that have provided additional rigour to the work that we've been doing. So I'd like to say a big thank you to those. Those academics have given their time generously, as have many of you. So if you contributed to the Knowledge Programme, if you are a Knowledge partner, thank you. Thank you for giving your time to completing the surveys. Thank you to those of you who participated in the in-depth interviews. None of this work is possible without your contribution. I would also like to extend a massive thank you to our research partners. So we've had the fortune to work with two brilliant research partners. We've got WPI Economics and DJS Research. And finally, just to say a massive thank you to our partner at Ownership at Work, who've gone above and beyond, provided a Herculean effort to get these landmark findings available to us. So, before we get into the findings, and I know that's why most of you are here to hear Campbell share more detail about what we've discovered, I just would like to spend a few minutes just to recap, why did we go about undertaking this piece of work? Well, for many years, the EOA has been celebrating the rapid rise of employee ownership across the UK. We recorded 37% growth last year, and that's followed similar patterns over previous years. But we're not celebrating growth for growth's sake. No, we're celebrating the impact that employee ownership delivers. At the EOA, we regularly hear members talking about how they've become more profitable after they've transitioned to EO, how their workplaces are happier and healthier, how they've lent into EO during difficult times. And I think we can all agree there's been way too many of those of late. So we know anecdotally that employee ownership is a better way to do business, that employee ownership helps unlock potential within a business. But what was missing from this was a concrete baseline. that demonstrated both the scale and impact that employee ownership was having across the UK. And that's what we set out to achieve, to establish that baseline. And from there, we would then be able to take a narrative and take a message back to you, back to members, but also to our wider network, to ensure that the conditions that enable employee-owned businesses to thrive are protected, sustained, and hopefully amplified. So we've gone about this working with an independent researcher. We knew that marking our own homework wasn't the way to go. We wanted to make sure that our findings would stand up independently when we put them in front of policymakers or influencers, or indeed employee owners in your businesses. So that's why we commissioned Ownership at Work, who went out and secured the services of WPI Economics and DJS Research to undertake the work. Now, the findings that have come back are absolutely remarkable and will absolutely add fuel to our fire as we look to champion employee ownership and the continued growth of employee ownership across the UK. I really think that this adds significant value to the understanding of what's happening within employee-owned businesses, but also into a wider influencing piece, enabling us collectively to take our messages out to a much broader and wider network, with the assurance that what we're saying is backed up by hard data and evidence. It's a really exciting moment for us. And for the EOA, we feel like this is a real step change, the start of another exciting chapter for EO across the UK. And so I'm very excited to share this information with you. Now, I know the report has been out in the ether for a week. We launched this report in the House of Commons last week. It was great to see members and our partners there with us. So maybe you've already digested the findings. Maybe you've got a list of questions that you're already keen to explore with us, hopefully. If you do put them in that Q&A. But I'm going to hand over now to Campbell McDonald, who's going to take you through the findings. He's going to explain what we've discovered and introduce the knowledge programme, People Powered Growth. Campbell, over to you.
I hope people can hear me. Thank you, James, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joined this session. So, look, just to add to James's introduction, I part-time, I run Ownership at Work, just to introduce us as an organization. If you haven't come across this, we aim to be we're a think tank, and we aim to produce evidence and raise understanding of the impact of sharing ownership and participation in the workplace. We've been around since roughly about 2019, and this is the big headline piece of work that we've done. It's taken us about a part of a couple of years from fundraising through to last week. We still have more outputs to come. I'll talk a bit about that. And I guess I just wanted to add to some of those thank yous very quickly, which is just to say thank you to James, and actually before James, Deb Oxley, who kind of with us really drove the fundraising to enable this to happen. I just add one other thing, I think, at the start here, which is, so I've worked in the sector myself for over 15 years in one guise or another, and spent 8 years of that kind of running an employee-owned business, which was called Baxendale now, Baxi Partnership originally. And through that work and through that time, I have worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of other employee-owned businesses. And what I would say is that the sector has talked a good game for a very long time. But I would be amazed if many of you on this call have not had those moments where you have described the apparent benefits of this model to an audience of some kind, maybe your own colleagues, maybe external stakeholders, banks, whomever it is, and you slightly dread the question that says, can you prove it? Because for a long time as a sector, our answer to that question has been to point at individual businesses. And we can talk about total numbers, and we've got some headlines here and there, but essentially for a long time, we've relied on pointing at exemplars, good firms, and saying, look at what's going on there. And that was what we set out to change. That was what we set out to address in this project, in the EO Knowledge Program. We knew that if we were going to sustain and enhance conversations with external stakeholders, particularly government, particularly Treasury, HMRC, we needed Treasury quality data, and it needed to include quantitative data, not just qualitative data, and it needed to cover not just the economic impact, but also the social impact and as far as possible, the environmental impact. And that was what we set out to do. That was the gap. And I hope, I believe we've taken a really powerful step forward towards addressing that. And I will invite you all to be the judge of that. So look, what I'm going to do quickly is I'm just going to start by talking about how, just a little bit of detail, kind of how we went about it. And then I'm going to try and tell a story, and I'm going to try and reduce 2 years' work into about 10 slides. But I'm going to tell you the story of what we found. So before I do that, just the how. So we set out, as James said, we didn't want to be accused of marking our own homework. So we brought in independent research partners. We had QA delivered by independent academics. And we had two principal elements within the program. So one was the survey, and as James acknowledged, quite a number of you, I'm sure, helped us by responding to that. And we managed to survey just shy of 10% of the sector. So that is employee and worker-owned businesses across the UK. We set out to try to make that cohort that we spoke to broadly representative of the shape, if you like, of the sector in the UK. So a roughly, it's a small number still, but a roughly proportionate set of 100% EOT-owned businesses, hybrid businesses where you might have a mix of an EOT and something else, some direct shareholding or an EBT, businesses that were entirely owned in a direct shareholding model, and worker cooperatives. We set out to try to ensure we had a geographical spread and a spread across sectors and a roughly proportionate spread of sizes of businesses, because we wanted with some confidence to be able to say, well, look, what we think we've seen in the survey, we think we can reasonably extrapolate across the sector. So that's point one. That was a major source of data. And then we wanted to back that up. We wanted to understand, as far as possible, what was going on inside those businesses, and what were the management choices that were being made that were driving those impacts. So our second major data input was to go out and interview 65 employee-owned businesses. Again, a number of you may have taken part in that phase, and thank you if you did. And in shy of half of those, we also were able to have a conversation with somebody who was in an employee representative position, really to check, to reassure ourselves, one of a number of reassurances we built into this, that this wasn't just a good line coming from senior management, that this was something that was actually being experienced by the teams in these businesses. So those were the two major data points, and almost done on this bit, but it's just worth saying, our view at Ownership at Work has always been that there's really two ways to show the differential impact of ownership. One is to compare employee-owned businesses with comparable, roughly similar non-employee-owned businesses. And that was what we did with the survey data. So alongside that group of 152 employee-owned businesses, we also surveyed a control group of just shy of 300 non-employee-owned businesses. And that is what has allowed us to say, at this moment in time, the impacts of this group compare with this group in the following way. And that's not something we've seen done before in the UK on the scale that we've tried to do it. And then the second way is to say, well, what is the difference inside an organization before broad-based ownership is introduced and afterwards? That's a harder task, but we've tried to include an element of that. So in a number of our questions, we had fail-safes, if you like, things that were saying, well, can you be very clear how much of this change has come about since you introduced broad-based ownership? So look, I've spent a little time on that because I really do want people to try to understand the level of rigor that we've tried to build into going and finding these results. I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but I do welcome any additional questions on it. So look, let's get to the headlines. Let's get to the meat of what we think we found. So thank you, Joe. That's very, very helpful. So look, first point here is to say that there is an explosion, frankly, of energy behind the model right now. And I think most of us know this. So we set about trying to work out as accurate a view as possible as we could of the total number of employee and worker-owned businesses in the UK. And this was the first time we think that anyone has done this, certainly in the last few years, which was to take not only existing employee-owned business data sets, to take the worker cooperative data set, to clean those, to fuse them. We then worked with an organization called Glass AI, who ran an algorithmic process for us to identify additional data out there to see if there were other businesses that none of us had sight of. And look, we suspect that the headline number is higher than that 1,650 you can see there. That is manually verified as far as we can get it, but there's more work to do with that data. But the simple truth is that there isn't a nationally gathered data set that tells us very simply what this number looks like. So we're working within the bounds of the way that data exists at the moment. We all know, I believe, that these are businesses that exist in every corner of the economy, and increasingly in every corner of the country. And our belief and now our findings tell us that they make an outsized contribution to the economy, and I'll give you some stats on that in a moment. But look, right now, we are in the midst of a hockey stick of growth. The sector grew by over 30% in the last 12 months. It has done that for 2 years on the trot now. And the principal driver of that growth currently is the EOT model. But what this means, this is really important context for our external audiences, for our non-sector audiences, particularly our government and political audiences, in a context where we've got very little money to spend as a country on digging ourselves out of a productivity black hole, a set of doldrums in terms of economic performance. There's lots of noise coming from major parties saying we don't have funding to do a lot of this. So they're looking for supply side solutions, and really this energy is supply side energy. It's coming from the wider economy, supported and prompted by a number of us. But this is one of the things that makes this incredibly exciting for external audiences and hopefully for us. So look, that's the context. And the reason why we felt it was so important right now to really understand what was going on in these businesses. So Joe, if you could move us on to the next slide. Thank you. So look, the big headline in terms of economic impact is that we found that employee owners rate to 12% more productive than employees in non-employee owned businesses. Now, in the context of literally 20 years, a generational lack of meaningful growth in productivity in the UK, that is a really, really powerful headline. It is essentially our headline finding. When you come, no, so that is measured as GVA, so gross value added, i.e. productivity at, per employee. When you bring that up to the level of individual firms, what you find is that employee-owned businesses tend to be more profitable. They tend to be creating more jobs. They're growing their employee base at a faster rate, and those are good jobs. We'll get into that a little more. And these are businesses that are doing more than non-employee-owned businesses to invest and innovate in the quality of their services and their products. And all of these are critical factors for any government in terms of what the kind of growth that they want to see right now. And then when we bring that right up to the level of what's the level of contribution to the whole economy, we see that a cohort which represents 0.1% of the total number of businesses in the UK is actually generating 0.8% of direct GVA in the country. And when you scale that up then to, so the way productivity is measured, you have a direct number, but then you have an indirect and an induced number you add to that. And we get up to 2.1%. So that is 41 billion contribution to the economy. And that's today. If EO businesses carry on growing at the rate they are, then by 2030, there's an opportunity for an additional up to over 70 billion contribution to the economy from this sector. So these are big numbers. Again, the point being, when it comes to getting the attention of key audiences, particularly policymaker and political decision makers, these numbers are absolutely vital and they are compelling. So if I can move us on, Joe, thank you. So look, what we wanted to understand then was, okay, look, these are good numbers. These are impressive. But what's driving it? What is going on in these businesses that accounts for those impacts, those economic impacts? And what we found was that there were benefits that were generated or are being generated by your businesses across a number of critical dimensions. So one is this impact on the health and well-being of employees. We know how important that is. The post-pandemic context means this is absolutely vital. Jesse Norman, when he was Chief Secretary of the Treasury and gave the Oakeshott lecture a couple of years ago, said to us in that Q&A, if you can show me real data that demonstrates the link between your business model and the well-being of employees, the doors in the Treasury are going to open for you. So what do we find? We find that employee-owned businesses do more to support access to private healthcare than non-employee-owned businesses. They do much more in terms of flexible working, in terms of remote working, in terms of supporting accessibility to work, whilst the numbers around health and safety incidents in the workplace are overall incredibly low. Nonetheless, the differential is significant, is very large in terms of the degree to which there are fewer health and safety incidents in employee-owned businesses. And then ultimately, do we believe this is working? Do we believe this is having an impact on employee owners? And those two big numbers you see there, 83%, over 4 out of 5 employee owners report that they feel more motivated after becoming employee owners, and 73% report that they enjoy their jobs more after becoming owners. These are incredibly powerful numbers again. Joe, if you can move us on. So not only in this regard, but also in terms of supporting development, growth, skills, employee-owned businesses offer more. So we see a significant uplift in the amount of investment that is going into on-the-job training for employees. Now that number is adjusted for firm size. So if you're small, you maybe think, gosh, that looks high, but that is just an averaged number. But the pattern across the group is that employee-owned businesses invest more to promote on-the-job skills than non-employee-owned businesses. But then in addition to that, what do we already know? We know that as businesses, we share more critical business information, and that was true across every category of business information we asked about. And of course, we offer more involvement, more opportunity to influence, more opportunity to understand strategic decision making. And the conclusion of the independent researchers was that they felt the combined impact of those two things was absolutely fundamental to what we believe is the additional resilience of employee-owned businesses. Joe, if you could move us on. So you would imagine as well, therefore, that this next step is really, really important to external audiences right now. And for a lot of us, I think really speaks to the core motivations of why we believe in this model. We wanted to understand whether employee-owned businesses were contributing to a fairer economy. And sure enough, we believe they are, and that they are in a powerful way. So we wanted to see whether there was a greater impact at the lower end of the income scale. And we identified that employee-owned businesses tend to pay a higher, fairer basic wage. Again, this may feel like stating the obvious, but we might expect that an employee-owned business would do more to share reward. But our observation is that in terms of percentage of gross operating profit shared as reward with employees, employee-owned businesses return twice as much to employees than non-employee-owned businesses. These other factors that I haven't highlighted, though, they're really important as well. Quite sizable, significant differences in the degree or the how far employee-owned businesses go to look after the financial well-being of their employees, particularly through pandemic over the last 3 to 5 years, particularly supporting people through cost of living. We asked across a whole range of measures. We see that employee-owned businesses are more likely to have policies in place that support diverse and inclusive workplaces and accreditations that support those, those activities actually happening. And then that final point in the top right there, I think, is really, really key, because there is a big picture argument that we try to make, particularly to government, where there's a lot of pressure on wealth inequality, on income inequality levels in the UK. And the observation you would feel should be obvious, but in an economy where statistically we can see that the vast number of people who are business owners are white and male, almost just by definition of sharing ownership across broader groups, we are starting to chip away, if you like, at that kind of inequality. So again, we feel is a very, very powerful set of findings. And then, Joe, if you move us on to the next, that point about our businesses essentially being regenerative and giving back is not just limited to employees. So you might look at those multiple dimensions of benefits to employees and say, well, look, there's and this is what the researchers say. They say, look, there's clearly a link. There must be a link here between the productivity levels and what we're doing. But actually, more broadly, our businesses are businesses that give back. They give back to the communities in which we operate. We discovered large differences. I mean, even we were surprised by what we found in terms of the scale of the differences in the levels of supported volunteering days offered, so time given back to local communities, advocacy done on behalf of community causes, charitable giving, that is generated and recycled back into community causes. That's over 500 million more than our non-employee owned cohort, in terms of what is going back on an annual basis into local communities. Again, really powerful stuff. And then Joe, if you'd move us on to the next slide. So when you do these survey exercises, and we did ours with YouGov, you get quite beaten up because you try to get as much data as you can, but they keep telling you you've got to reduce the number of questions because you're asking too much and people will drop off. And those of you who completed our questions may have some sympathy with that. So we only asked a relatively limited number of questions regarding environmental impacts. But sure enough, we also discovered that a greater proportion, a notably greater proportion of you have net zero carbon management strategies and targets in place, and you're more likely to have kind of wider environmental sustainability accreditations in place. And again, for that, we asked people to be clear about the degree to which this was happening or more was being done since you became employee owned and since employees had a larger voice in this. And the answer was yes, this is being driven by that employee voice in part. So it's not just that everyone was a good company first. The ownership model really is we can attribute some of this impact to the ownership model. And so then, look, you've been very good listening to me, and I do promise I am nearly done. So look, Joe, if you move us on, there's about 2 or 3 more slides. So final point on these headlines is just this point about resilience, resilience at the level of employees, resilience at the level of businesses, and resilience at the level of the economy. So we see that employee-owned businesses have shown they're more financially resilient, less likely to reduce debt, less likely to grow debt, less likely to reduce levels of investment over recent years, more sustained optimism and likelihood to invest in the future. But this one is, I just think, just absolutely jumps up and hits you in the face. If you have been an employee owner in the last 3 years, we asked this question, you are 5 times less likely to have been made redundant. And as you go down to smaller EO firms, that grows, that becomes 8 times less likely. That is such a testament to businesses that set out to look after their own, that I think it's just incredibly powerful. So look, those are the headlines. Those are the impacts we found. We fundamentally believe, therefore, that this is a real reset in the baseline of what we understand to be the impact on the economy of our businesses in the UK. Joe, if you'd move us on, it's worth just very quickly kind of touching on kind of what next and what do we do with this. So James and I tried at our House of Commons launch, and we'll be continuing to in terms of talking to government, to policymakers and so on, particularly given where we are in the electoral cycle, to push given this explosion, this little sort of quiet revolution, if you like, that's going on in responsible, sustainable productivity driven by this business model. Imagine what we did, imagine what the impact would be if we could just tweak it, just improve, just accelerate the number of these businesses, build on this energy that already exists. And we'll be pressing on certain things we believe will support that, setting ambitious targets, actually getting explicit support from political leadership in the some of that, but more of it, translating that into a policy focus so that there are actual policy measures that are changing. Just while we're on that, it's worth saying that James and I met directly with the team who still are running the consultation, HMRC consultation on EOTs and EOBs. That closed late September. We met with them before they finished, and they have said, look, we really desperately want this data. We're looking forward to it. We are not going to publish any conclusions or recommendations until we've seen it. So, they are, have embraced this. We brought the chief economist from WPI Economics in, who led on this, to explain, and had spent 9 years in Treasury and 2 years as chief economist at a different government department, to explain to them how we'd gone about building those productivity numbers and how credible it was. And they absolutely embraced that. And they actually suggested they felt that, often they try to make the case internally to do more here, and they get questioned on this data, and now they really feel like they may have it. So just to reassure you, we believe that will have legs inside Whitehall and kind of with other with more political decision makers. But what do we actually need to do to drive it and change it? Just coordinated awareness raising, 100%. Really thinking about access to capital. I'm not going to go into these, but the final point I want to hit is better data. So it is worth acknowledging, look, we've built this based on a 10% sample size, which is big, but we're still relatively small in overall numbers. When we get down and try to break down some of the data at the level of different ownership types and so on, we lose quite a lot of that statistical significance, i.e. our ability to definitely say one thing does one thing, does this drives this. So we need to keep going. We do need better data. We've got a call for government to do a better job of nationally gathering some of these data points, but we need to keep doing more to improve it and compound and build the impact of this over time. And I know EOA have got some really, really exciting plans for how they want to do that. Joe, if you want to just move me on, final 2 slides from me, everyone, and I will be quiet then, I promise. So look, just to sort of put up a bit, though, we did try to kind of understand better, look, what is driving those impacts. So we looked at some of the structural issues, as I mentioned, firm size, ownership type, and the headline conclusion that was essentially that the EOB impacts seemed to be consistent, largely very consistent, regardless of these factors. And then so these comments around the edge here, they really are not statistically significant, but they're signposts, they're points that OAW certainly will try to understand better over upcoming years. But there seems financially to be a very marginal benefit where there is some direct ownership in play, but it's very marginal, as I said, compared to pure 100% EOT ownership, which again is then slightly ahead of cooperative ownership. EOTs appear, to be more financially resilient and to do a little more on a couple of the benefit points and external accreditations. We discovered that the average deferred consideration period for EOT was 6.8 years, which was a little higher, I confess, than I thought it would be. But that we definitely could see an uplift in financial impacts, so performance and distribution. Once exiting owners had been paid off, which I think is quite powerful for those businesses. And then there's some of the differences on size, again, very marginal. I mean, I think we expected that larger businesses might be better able to afford certain benefits, but actually it was quite powerful to see that smaller EOBs do more on certain fronts, particularly this point about kind of being less likely to be made redundant, higher retention. That was pretty powerful. But look, and then Joe, final slide, please, from me. So look, there is more to come. There is more to come. So what we did, so that second strand of data that I described, those interviews with management teams, that has informed some of what's gone into what's already been published, but the really rich data, what's common practice, what's best practice, what do teams tell us is driving the impacts in their businesses. We're going to publish our findings on that. That will come out ahead of conference at the end of November. And I think will be really, really interesting. And we're going to do a session at conference to really talk about that. Colleagues from DGS Research are on this call, and they will be helping us, at that event. So that'll be really exciting. Before we get there, so in the next couple of weeks, Ownership at Work are going to publish something called Generation EO, the Great Succession Opportunities. So what we've done there, and we partner with DGS to do this as well, is we've done two things. We've gone out and surveyed over 500 sets of owners of businesses in the surveyed owners of businesses in the wider economy to understand how many sale opportunities, if I could put it that way, are actually likely to materialize in the next 5 to 10 years. And therefore, if you like, if we believe that right now, roughly kind of, let's say 1 in 20 sales takes place to an EOT, how might that increase? And therefore, what is the scale of our opportunity? And then when we multiply that opportunity against some of these impacts that we've seen, again, our ability to supercharge messages to external audiences and say, look at what the art of the possible is here, I think will be incredibly powerful. And then the second part of that is we've interviewed a number of vendors, of owners who've sold to their employees through different mechanisms, because there is a big gap in that. And so anecdotally, there's lots of stuff about how owners find this typically a better experience than a trade sale, a standard third-party trade sale experience. Nonetheless, it isn't really captured anywhere. So those two are coming out in the next month, and we hope it will really enhance what we've got to say here. But thank you so much for listening to me. Sorry to have talked at you all for so long. I really hope it's been interesting. We've loved it. And apologies for geeking out with all of this data on you, but thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. I'm seeing lots of rounds of applause popping up on the screen. So there's certainly an acknowledgement that this is all really positive for members, positive for the wider sector. So thank you all for listening. We did say we'd do some Q&A. We've had a couple of questions, and none of them really correlate directly to the research. So it seems a little unfair to put Campbell on the spot there and sort of throw those at them. But there was a question from Jade, which was around how do you facilitate more involvement in decision making? Now, while that doesn't speak directly to the findings of the research, Campbell's just introduced that there is another piece of work coming. So the second output of this piece of work is more around the practices, the behaviours that we find in employee-owned businesses that are driving some of those findings that we've just shared. And within those practices, there is certainly reference to and detail around participation, employee engagement, etc., which is something that the EOA talks frequently about. Is how do different businesses tackle it in different ways? There's not a cookie cutter solution to how you facilitate involvement. I don't know if you wanted to just reference anything from your other or sort of broader experience on that thing, Campbell, and I'll just sense check if any other questions have come in. Yeah, no problem, James. I mean, look, James is right. So there will be a dedicated section in what we're going to publish ahead of conference on the commonality of the ways in which employee-owned businesses that we spoke to are facilitating involvement in decision making. What I can tell you based on what we published to date is that there is the ways, the degrees. So there's two parts, and we asked across a broad range of types of business information, was this shared and explained with employees? And the answers were overwhelmingly yes. So to that point about kind of how do you facilitate involvement in decision making, sharing information effectively and making sure that your colleagues understand that information and its context and how their business works and they know what to do with it. It's clearly coming through as a kind of powerful driver for some of these impacts.
And to Maureen's question, yeah, absolutely. Employees get to see a completed business plan and quite often sort of have an influence on the content, the final content of that business plan. And the second piece to that is making sure that so again the number of channels and the number of opportunities that employees have to not just have their voice heard, but to understand and feed into the way strategic decisions are made in an EO business is common. It's broad. There are multiple channels, much more than non-employee-owned businesses. You might expect that. And the research was very explicit. As I said, they felt it was the combination of those two things, combination of effective information sharing and participation, that was absolutely key. Now, what I haven't done there is give you a sort of very practical set of, here are the things you could do, just because, but I'm happy to get into some more detail in, table discussions and so on.
Those practical examples are coming, Campbell, and actually you referenced the EOA conference, and there's a lot of content around that. There is a question from Sophie about the research. So with the increase in profit findings, she's asked, is there a difference between large EO companies versus the smaller ones? And you referenced in your remarks that the majority of the sector are the EOTs and our SMEs, but it'd be good to just talk about and explore that, the differentials and what we found there.
Yeah, and the answer is probably not very helpful, Sophie, because as I said, the headline was that pretty much across the board on impacts, including profit share, and we asked a question, if you like, that was based on proportion. So we had to kind of figure out within the questions where we could ask for a specific data point and the degree to which that would cause drop-off or make our survey sort of so unpalatable that we wouldn't get the degree of answers we wanted from non-employee-owned businesses as well as employee-owned businesses. And the strong advice, therefore, was when you ask for specific amounts, you hit reluctance, you hit concerns about transparency and privacy, and so on. So what we ended up asking for was a percentage. What's a proportion of gross operating profits that you ultimately share? And on that mark, in terms of proportionality, we didn't see a huge difference between large and smaller EOBs. The quantum, if you like, my assumption would be larger for obvious reasons, but yeah, we don't have that data. Weren't able to get it within the scope. So look, I hope that's helpful as far as I can go.
I mean, with the data that we have, but we do have a question around sort of what next, Campbell. So Angela's asked a question around what are the main messages to government in relation to the EO legislation and financial investment, which is actually something that we touched on when we shared these findings in the House of Commons. So I'd just like to just tee that up initially, Angela, to sort of say that the EOA has been taking these findings to government. We were at both of the party political conferences earlier in the month, which gave us an opportunity to land these messages, albeit tailored slightly different ways to both sides of the House. And as Campbell mentioned, we've had direct engagement with HMRC in relation to the EOT and the EBT consultation, and there was strong appetite for what we're sharing and acknowledgement that the positive findings that are emerging from there. Your question regarding sort of financial investment, the EO sector is not on its own in relation to the lack of access to capital for SMEs. This is a problem that's consistent across the network, is something that we hear as the EOA regularly. Hopefully, and I'll pass over to Campbell to add more to this, but I feel that these findings will help educate and will provide an interest in this sector to those in the financial space. So we will be, as the EOA, taking these findings and building on existing relationships and trying to foster new ones where we can try to raise awareness and understanding of EO and the differences that it's delivering so that financial institutions are familiar with the model and are not falling at the first hurdle going down the rabbit warren of ownership structures, etc. Campbell, have you anything else to add on those 2 points?
No, only that. So I would make 2 points, I guess, just building on what you've said and what I said earlier, Angela. So look, the thrust of the messaging to government overall is wake up to the fact that you've got a really good thing here. And by the way, this is largely being driven, the speed of growth in employee-owned business numbers is being driven essentially by policy intervention, by the introduction of the EOT. So it's quite often hard for government to find sort of straightforward examples of we did something relatively small and actually this is now happening, and there's energy in the wider economy that's simply responding to what we've done. So we're using that as a starting point to say, look, these are the numbers. So HMRC, we think there's huge value for money here for the country in terms of the relatively small amount, therefore, that you're investing in tax reliefs to deliver these kinds of returns. And I think the next step is, look, without you needing to find lots of extra taxpayer-funded activity here, there's quite a lot you could do to continue to frame and promote this environment that encourages more of this, and supporting our awareness raising and revisiting, things like, for instance, could you increase the income tax-free allowance that's available to employees, in employee-owned businesses? Might you consider that, given the broader positive impact, socially, and so on? So that's the thrust of that. I'm not going to add to the financial investment piece because I think James has teed it up. And look, again, I'm happy to go into it on tables because it's a bit of a longer conversation.
Great. Well, and that's we'll take one more question, Campbell, and then we are going to break out into those tables. So Alan has asked a really interesting question. So Alan, you've said that the 10% uplift is very encouraging. Couldn't agree more. But what does this look like? So he's asked, is it just 10% more hours being worked within an employee business, or is it more nuanced than that? So that range, the 8 to 12% range of added value, the added GVA. Maybe if we could just unpack that a little bit, and then after that we'll go into the tables.
Okay, sure. So Alan, so you win the prize because the question that has replaced my previous fear of prove it. The question I now least want to be asked is explain productivity and how it's measured, Campbell, because that is something that I have tried to do before, and usually an economist tells me that I'm slightly off. That's a long way of saying it's a relatively nuanced piece. What we asked of WPI Economics was, so their starting point was for treasury quality, you've got to find a way to make up for the fact that there's still relatively little data, because just the size of the sector, and when you get down into individual sectors within the economy, the numbers of businesses we're talking about are relatively low still. So what they did was come up with a very, and having tested it with HMRC, a very credible way of building a picture that said, this is what we believe the productivity contribution is. It is not as simple as more hours worked. So I guess what I would say is, well, let me make a final observation on this one, Alan, because I think that's a decidedly unsatisfactory answer I've given you. But my final point here is we've expressed that number as a range very deliberately. The reason it is expressed as a range, 8 to 12%, is because there is not a finite and 100% accurate recognized number of data point for the total number of employees who work in employee-owned businesses in the UK. So what the economists came up with was a credible range. And that is what then drives the range in the productivity statement. And when we tested this with a program oversight board and the academics, the universal view was, don't reduce it to 10%. Don't do that. Like go, keep the range, because it's more credible expressed as a range. And it gives us leverage for this response to government that says, we really need you to start collecting some national common data points here. So look, I've horrifically sidestepped your request for examples. Apologies for that. And James, I know you want us to duck into to the networking, but I might just really quickly, if it's okay, there was a question from Anita on the, which I think I have a quick answer to, on the kind of EOBs who are in their deferred consideration window.
Yes,
and maybe you're not quite seeing a lot of these benefits, and I suspect that maybe, you will not be alone in that reaction, Anita. There will be a number of businesses who are at different levels of maturity who are saying, this sounds great, but if lots of other people are getting this, we don't quite see this and what's happening. And the big message from me there is, to carry out this research, we built a theory of change. So we built something that said, this is what we believe, this is our hypothesis, this is what we believe drives benefits that are claimed on behalf of this model. And then we went out and tested that and said, is it the case? And that theory of change has two really critical decision points in it. So the first is the choice of existing owners to share ownership and participation broadly. But that on its own does not automatically guarantee any of these impacts. There is a second critical decision point, which is the senior teams running those businesses then make a set of choices about how, forgive this word, but how to operationalize ownership in the business, how to bring it to life, and they decide, hopefully, how they're going to explicitly deliver some of these impacts. And the way in which that happens is the most critical point in the degree to which you see those impacts materialize. So you'll get more when we publish the interview data in terms of what are people doing, where they've told us, we believe these are the most powerful things we're doing that are driving positive impacts for our colleagues. But that's my initial answer. You've got to have a leadership team who are doing everything they can, and within the constraints of that deferred consideration period, your options may be limited, but lots of businesses are showing there are still things you can do. So look, I'm happy to talk about that more again. So.
Big thumbs up there, Campbell, floated up the screen. So look, I think, well, we're out of time for Q&A. So Campbell, thank you again, not only for all the work in this piece, but summarizing 2 years of work in 20 minutes. That's an impressive feat. All the findings are available online. There was a question earlier on around whether we'll share the slides. The EOA, working with Ownership at Work, are going to package up this content in a way that we feel enables and equips members to activate it and utilize it in meaningful ways within their business. So that will follow in due course. But for now, Joe, if you could help facilitate the next step so that we could share who's in the room, in the virtual room, and hosting tables. So look, thank you to our colleagues at DGS Research, Matt and James, who've joined us today. Also to Nathan, who is Campbell's colleague at Ownership at Work. They are all hosting tables to talk more about their involvement in the knowledge program or what else they're sort of working on in this space or as part of this program. I'm going to have a general conversation around the EOA, and I've got my brilliant colleagues here. So I've got Ollie and Julie. Again, another general conversation. If you've got questions around your membership or our events or anything that the EOA has in store for the remainder of the year, please do jump on the table. Similarly with Leslie and Yogi, if you've got questions around your learning needs, I'd definitely suggest talking to those two about EO Learn. And my colleague Sam, who's sort of the engine room on a lot of our policy positioning pieces. Sam's going to be hosting a conversation around some of the policy implications for these findings and maybe some of the reflections from our attendance at the party conferences. So plenty to choose from, hopefully of interest, certainly of relevance to what we've just shared. So I think now's going to be the opportunity. Joe's going to facilitate this in the background. You're going to be able to click who you're going to sit and speak to, and feel free to float around the tables. You know, this is not like a Zoom where you're locked into one room. We'll be brought back in about 20 to 25 minutes, depending on how busy the tables are. So yeah, please pop in, say hello, meet some new people, pose a few questions, make the best use of the time. Brilliant. So Joe, I think that's over to you to open up the tables. Hey, everybody. Well, I hope you've had some good conversations. That's it. That is where we are up to with the knowledge program, People Powered Growth. Hopefully you've taken some useful takeaways from that and had some positive conversations. It was really nice to meet some of you and to hear some of how you plan to utilize this information within your own businesses. So we know that this is going to be valuable going forward. It's always great to take new ideas and information back out to members. So thank you for joining to us today. A huge thank you to Campbell and Ownership at Work for that. Thank you again to our principal sponsors and our supporting partners for the Knowledge Programme, and for everyone who contributed to this piece of work. It really, really is a milestone for the sector, and I just cannot wait for us to take things forward. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons, and I'll hopefully see lots of you in Liverpool later in this year. All the best for now. Thanks. Bye.